My name is Valery Fishchuk. I'm the co-head of the American Trade Chamber, and now we are beginning our meeting. We are having 1.5 hours ahead of us of an interesting conversation. Please pay attention at the democratic style and format of our meeting. And also, it's very symbolic that we are at the place which is called Unit City, and very soon it won't be just a place but also the whole city. As for the agenda, we are having 4 blocks. The first block, the presentation of the concept of the digital economy. The second block is the digital infrastructure. Then we are going to the digitalization of basic branches. We'll have agro-sector there and industry. And in the end, there will be digital education or digital competencies. So digital economy, the topic is really important. It's rather big and it's rather exciting. The practitioners say that digital economy is an efficient economy. And the researchers, very often they say that digital state of organization is becoming a normal, a usual state of its functioning. A very widely spread phrase is that digital economy doesn't depend on our wish to do it or not. It will exist. We will have to do it, in fact. So whether digital economy will become a priority of the government, I give the floor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine, Volodymyr Borissovich Groysman. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. First of all, I'd like to thank that today you found some time to take part in this incredibly important discussion. The question of the digital economy is the matter. Well, if we met each other about 10, 15 years ago, we would speak about the future, but we're meeting today. This is our today work, and the matter is that, in fact, if we focus upon the development of the digital economy, we can be successful. What task do we have as a country? We need some rapid economic growth. In fact, we're having everything to provide it. Unfortunately, the absence, the lack of pragmatic state policy, which led to institutional weakness, didn't give us an opportunity for us to become a very modern country. But I need to say that Ukraine has enough of intellect, enough of opportunities to become leaders. So for several years, we have already begun the work together with you and each of you in your own direction to change the situation in the country. I emphasize that digital economy for us is an incredibly important priority. The quick economic growth is possible only when we implement new modern technologies into the development of the national economy. Really, for lots of years, we've been the country with the raw material type of economy. We do understand that without the implementation of modern technologies, we won't be able to be sufficiently competitive, and that means that very quickly we can see the development of the events and the development of the technologies. If we don't implement them, it will be very difficult for us to compete for the qualitative changes. And of course, it's understandable we need to develop the infrastructures, the solutions, and the most important, to create the clever regulations for the digital economy to develop. I need to focus upon that the state and the parliament conjointly during the last year, they adopted the very important solutions and decisions which allow us to solve the tasks, the problems of the implementation of digital economy, to develop the infrastructure, to overcome the obstacles 3G, 4G, what we will discuss today. We do understand that any sectors which we take as a foundation, as the ground, they need new innovative decisions and solutions. And we will hear today about the real experience of Ukrainian successful companies which take the leading positions in Ukraine and the world as for the implementation of the innovative technologies, including the real sector. And also separately, I'd like to mention about the Ukrainian science. I think that we need to change the system of both funding and governing of the Ukrainian science. We're working with Ukrainian scientists. Recently, we created the Scientific Technical Council I am the head of, and this Council has to work upon the solutions which would allow us to create a very high-quality system of the science governing the real mechanisms of transfers creation and new scientific developments in the real sectors of economy. We have created, in fact, this year, the foundation of the support of startups, and also we have a rather interesting and big resource for the development of innovations. In fact, we will implement the new mechanisms of the support of innovations in the country and the support of startups. I think that today it would be that we will have substantially enough and interesting discussion. It would be interesting for me to hear which obstacles we have, which restrictions and limitations we have, which achievements we have. We are improving the situation, but I consider that we need reactive speed to develop the digital economy. We can see the leading economies which are developing rather serious way. They have growth of in the GDP of their countries, and it means that in this competitive world we need to be very quick and mobile. It depends both on the state and regulations and on the conditions we can create for the development of the real sector and all of the other spheres. We can't imagine ourselves the future science and healthcare and education without digital technologies, without the implementations of the new technological solutions. And separately, I'd like to mention that during several years, in fact since 2014, we've begun an intense work on e-services. We've changed the system of the information exchange between the state authorities. So our task today is to make really accessible and high-quality services which the state provides. And the most important thing is the important regulations or deregulations which need to open new opportunities for the development of all of the new real sectors of economy. That is why I think that today we will hear both about what we approved, the strategy of digital economy, the development of digital economy in Ukraine for 2018-20. I want to emphasize that the government is ready, together with you, to take all the necessary decisions which will allow us to be successful and Ukraine to become the leader as for the implementation of the innovations. And the most important thing, we need to reach the real economic growth. We have rather good signals from the national economy, but the growth in 2-3%, we do understand that it's not enough at all. So our task is 5+, and I think that the implementation of digital technologies will give an opportunity for us to become rather rapid and quick. And the most important thing, what the economy is working now on, we have to reinvest it into the quality of life. I will not deepen into the problematics of the qualified staff, preparation of the staff, and lots of other matters which need to be solved. For the 26 years of our independence, Ukraine, unfortunately, wasn't able to take the niche which we are worth. And now our task, using the new opportunities of the modern world, is to become one of the strongest economies of Europe. I do believe in that, and I'm deeply assured that these meetings and the development of common solutions will make us closer to this aim. Thank you, and I give you the floor for the discussion. Thank you, Volodymyr Borysovich, especially for the readiness to take the leadership as for the development of digital economy in Ukraine. By the way, for the operational development and the plan implementation of the events, which is foreseen by the concept of the digital economy development, we've foreseen the creation of so-called digital government committee. Please show the slide. When the group of experts was preparing this document, the concept, we paid attention first of all at those indices. Those are the indices of digital development. This is our place here. Well, we are in the middle of this ranking of other countries, but our aim during 3 years to achieve a substantial growth from 15 to 30 points according to each of the ratings. Well, of course, the figures is the formal question, but we have to conduct some actions. For instance, they say that numbers don't lie. The next one. Where are we losing from the point of view of technologization or digitalization of Ukraine? First of all, and furthermost, and the objective reality tells us, not only the indices, is the usage of the technologies. Three main points: penetration, absorption, and the intensity of usage. The simpler way, this is the coverage, the second is the depth of the usage, and the third is the intensity. And the strategy of the successful country, as for the digital economy, is in the usage of the technology by the citizens, by the business and the state everywhere, throughout, and as often as possible. The index DESI is a European experience. We have 31 indicators of digital development. We need to harmonize with it because we are coming closer to Europe and our digital structure has to be ready for it. Digital economy, and this is the main word, this is not about the computers and gadgets, it's not about the applications, it's about the processes, the models and transformations which are becoming possible with its help. And also, digital economy is not about IT companies. This is about all the other companies which are using the services of IT companies. Let us look at the transformation, digital transformation of any physical object. This is the tractor. It can be working and have any of the... It can be working precisely or only approximately. So if we have the system with the technologies, we will have the agricultural, more efficiency and healthy production. What's going on? We have the digital transformation of the object. For the digital transformation of the industries to take place and the spheres of life and the economy of itself, we need in Ukraine to do lots of things, beginning with the development of the national infrastructures, and the government is doing nice words in that, and digital competences, because we have the human in the tractor who governs it, and the e-commerce and the interaction of the business, and the and digital platforms, logistics, supply chains, and so on and so forth. We're speaking now not only about the digitalization on spot, some precise enterprise or object. We need digitalization from these objects to the whole economy and markets. We consider that the Ukrainian economy and industries and spheres of life is a wonderful polygon for digital transformation. So the concept foresees the projects in healthcare, in the production, in the education, the transport, and the city governance. Please remember the very important thesis about the third and the fourth industrial revolution. Dear friends and colleagues, the third was about the computers and the internet. We need to catch up to reach the fourth revolution and to make digital transformations and on the digital technologies. Lots of things are done in this direction. An important thesis as for this concept and the essence is that we need to move the focus, the governance focus, from the IT industry to all of the consumers of digital technologies, which are the core of digital economy. Those are different industries and spheres of life. They are the market. If they feel okay, the IT companies will feel okay. Now, unfortunately, we don't have enough of that market. That is why IT brains are digitalizing other economies, and Ukrainian IT brains have to work for themselves. So we need to change the focus of the digital economy. Three main theses for the business from the state: to create motivations and stimuli for digitalization, for the citizens to form the demand in digitalization, and for everyone to create digital infrastructures. This is the plan for the 3-4 years. We've implemented new initiatives in the concepts. Those are digital rights, indicators of digital development, roadmaps of digital transformations, national plan of the development of the wideband access, and this is maybe only the 3% of what we've planned. I give the floor to the first Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine, the Minister of Economic Development, Stepan Ivanovich Kubiv. Respected Mr. Prime Minister, dear colleagues, dear digital community, the leadership itself of the Prime Minister, not only of this year forum, but of the last year, and I will tell you that more than 1.5 years ago, when we had this certain task for me personally and for the whole Secretariat to consider that digital economy is the future of Ukraine. And as a result, we got the concept of the development of digital economy and society, which stimulates, motivates, and we're having the certain demand on the market. When, according to the task of the Prime Minister, we presented the discussion on the concept of the development, we defined 5 main aims as for the digital economy and its development. We saw it at the working group and then in the government. So in fact, this is the concept of the digital economy till 2020, which is the priority. And on the other hand, the leadership of the Prime Minister of Ukraine. The speeding up of the economic growth and involvement, attraction of the investments is the first one. The second one is the transformation of the sectors of the economy and the competitiveness, which was mentioned by Mr. Groysman, and his main sentence that we shouldn't interfere into the processes, but we should help the rules, the regulations and the processes. The third point is the technological and digital modernization. The fourth point is the accessibility for the citizenship, and the most valuable thing is the implementation of the human capital, the realization which is of human capital, which is rather high in Ukraine. And we're having a very precise matter by the Prime Minister. Problematics. We're having the problematics because there are lots of IT enterprises beyond Ukraine are opening their offices. They're founding data centers. I mean, for instance, Georgia, which we visited, Azerbaijan. Our engineers can be found, IT guys and IT technologists. We can see them in China, in India, in Turkey, in European countries. This is the question why. And we are asking this question for ourselves, and we are communicating today. So the meeting we're holding today tells us that if we, because we were speaking that we have to have a transition from the raw material economy to the innovative priority program which we approved of the digital economy and the development of the society of Ukraine, it will allow us to distribute and to involve the correspondent staff. So please come back home, so-called. Access to the internet, the standards of the internet access, you can see that on this slide. This is 100 megabit a second. We are speaking about the modern standards, and this is the foundation of the digital economy, the Internet of Things. We're speaking about the smart cities systems, and today we mentioned that a year ago we met here, and we are meeting in a year. We can see here the growth of human capital and human city, the city where we are meeting. And the second one is digital legislation. Digital legislation in cooperation with the Parliament and Mr. Danchenko. We are saying that about the market of those spheres and branches where the rules of the existence of the digital economy have to be defined and supported as for the legislation base. They need to be comprehensible, simple, accessible and efficient from the point of view of the price and the opportunities to use them and practice. Altogether, we don't need to avoid the matters of protection, cryptographic protection, and those products which Ukraine felt already in the branch of finances, the energy one. We're speaking about the hacking, which gives us new challenges, and the new products we need to develop, and digital skills. This is digital competence. We're speaking about a very simple truth, digital economy for all of the citizens. And this message itself is really important in the IT system. We are speaking that, please, recall about 10 years ago, the cell phones, how they looked like and how we used it and who used them. And now, here we have, there was the whole case, we had antennas, and what we felt today, how we went through that. But when we look into the truth of the engineer service, we can see the Ukrainian trace of intellect and human capital both in America and in Europe. I'm sorry, I was really amazed when in Delhi, in India, we met the businesses and 4 people were from Ukraine. 2 of them were from Kiev, 1 from Odessa and 1 from the west of Ukraine. And it tells us that our people can be seen, and it's really important today. I want to emphasize that digital inequality we find today, and the system the host told us about, is the matter which the Prime Minister asked us when we had the meeting of the government and the approval of the concept. We We were speaking that only 5.5 million of citizens have access to the high-speed internet, and this is not enough today, of course. We're speaking about the wideband access to the internet. This is 70% of territory of Ukraine, thanks to the changes in the legislation. And we've held one common meeting at the level of the committee of the parliament. This was the base meeting of our ministry and the Secretariat of Cabinet of Ministers and Dmytro Shimky from the presidential administration, where we defined those stages we need to implement. There's no policy there. We have experts there, politics there. We have risks there, which we have to face and to fight and to move forward. We are considering for the development of this project will allow us to attract huge investments, which will be long-term and most efficient, where we'll have some of the additional value and it will be maximum. With the private investments of $3 billion will be attracted annually till 2021, will make the number of internet users 3 times bigger. I told you about 5.5, and now we can see the forecast of 15 million of users. We're speaking about 80% of coverage in the rural areas. If we take the households today, 2 households out of the 10 have access to the internet. I would even say industrial one, which we can use now. But when we speak about the investments of 3 billions, we're having 7-8 households of 10, and this is totally different qualitative indicator. Digital legislation, for today we have to change it and to practice it, and these meetings we're having today, which will define the problematics, including the cryptographic protection as the product of reliability and development, they will give us the tasks for the MPs, for the government, for the community, which gathered together to have the whole priority line of the adoption of laws. You know, when I used to visit the Forum Ukraine-Europe, where, according to the decree of the government, I had the speech, I can tell you we have something to be proud of. We have this human capital, which is not perceived here. Unfortunately, we can't keep it today. I'm speaking about the aspects, the strategies, the motivation, not only about the demand at the market, but the motivation of the person, including the elements of the intellectual property. When we're speaking about the bureaucratic drawbacks, if we're speaking about the decisions which are taken non-transparently, we're having corruption actions which lead to the shadow capital. For that not to happen, we need to create conditions when it is profitable to work in the open space. We're speaking that the effect which is felt by the business, we are proud by agro-business. In the agrarian sphere, they showed the efficiency and the profitability of separate projects was increased for 30 to 90%. We can see the enterprises and businesses which are competitive today in the system of governance, the system of financial control, the systems of risks governance, systems of logistics and sales. This is what we can hear today, I think. At the 4th slide, we're speaking about the legislation and regulations field, and 80% of business projects will become digitalized. What was mentioned by the Prime Minister, that today we need to have the clever regulation and deregulation, which shouldn't be just the aim for the sake of the aim. There should be some results. There are some precise steps we were speaking about. IT experts must have an opportunity to digitalize their economy, and for that we need some real digital projects, and those digital products need to form the market of the Ukrainian economy, which will be for the structure, for the competitiveness, for the principles of the governance and controls of the risks, the funding, and the whole basket of European standards or the world standards. We're speaking with the language of the figures and products, and it is totally equal in each country. The need in the high-quality experts will lead to the change in the market of the professions. This is true. You can see that in the next slides when we are speaking about the things we need to implement. I want to say that our ministry, according to the decree of the Prime Minister, the common work of the Secretariat and the Verkhovna Rada, the Parliament of Ukraine, is speaking about the implementation of the main function of coordination of those changes which are headed by the Prime Minister of Ukraine. I'm sorry to mention about that for the third time already. This is telling us about the efficiency and the priority of the transformations. The Coordination Center invites the digital community for the discussion of the problematics, for the recommendations, the formations of the standards, not only of the law which is adopted by the Verkhovna Rada, but lots of changes will be able to be provided according to the decrees of the government. In the framework of my speech, I'd like to say that Coordination Center will become the ground, the playground, and we can see that digital solutions for some key directions of 2018-20 are correspondent to the government project and program. And to wrap it up, I'd like to say that digitalization can't be the task for some one person. This is the conjoint, common work of the state, of the community, of people, of the business. This is the exchange of information. This is the discussion. We need to feel each other, and we need to achieve the progress which will play its role in this process. Today, the government of Ukraine is the leader of digital changes, and it will implement the concept and the plan of digital transformation of Ukraine. So please, we really invite you for the discussion. We give you the floor, and not only today, but for the daily communication to solve the problems we're having. Thank you for your discussion, attention. Thank you, Stepan Ivanovich. I like it when you, as the first Vice Prime Minister and the Minister of Economic Development, that the digital economy is creating the resources, because the analog is only consuming it. So the key one is the data. So please show us a short video reel. Economy of Ukraine needs
темпів зростання. Потужний поштовх до економічного поступу зазвичай надає впровадження різноманітних технологій, зокрема цифрових. Частка цифрової економіки у світі постійно зростає. Це створює безліч переваг для держав та бізнесу. Україні також потрібен цифровий стрибок. Спільно з експертними спільнотами уряд розробив концепцію та план дій, які закладають основи розвитку цифрової економіки країни. Концепція будується навколо людини, цифрової модернізації та покращення усіх сфер її життя. Приміром, в освіті цифровізація призведе до якісних змін для учнів та вчителів. Розвиток цифрової економіки базується на створенні цифрових інфраструктур. Так, збільшення доступу до швидкісного інтернету забезпечує зростання ВВП. Ось чому в планах уряду втричі збільшити кількість інтернет-користувачів в країні. Цифровізація також має на меті цілковиту трансформацію наявних галузей економіки і розвиток нових. Яскравим прикладом цифрової трансформації в Україні є агропромислова сфера. Завдяки цифровізації ми значно підвищимо ефективність галузі, відродимо сільські території та матимемо більш здорове суспільство. Запорука повноцінного розвитку цифрової економіки – високий рівень цифрової грамотності громадян. Його підвищення – один із пріоритетів роботи уряду. Як Україні досягти своєї мети? Уперше за кілька десятиліть урядом розроблено чіткий план цифрового розвитку країни. Україна має усі умови для здійснення цифрового стрибка та переходу на більш високий технологічний рівень. Зміни вже відбуваються. Уряд Володимира Гройсмана.
Thank you. So maybe when we were speaking about the increase of the number of internet users, we were speaking about the wide band access, because we have much more usual users than just 15%, of course, in Ukraine. So our wide band access is the next block for the discussions, and we'll have the certain speeches. But let me introduce this block first of all, the broadband access. So the digital structures is the carcass of the digital economy, the citizens who lack the access for the digital infrastructure are in fact excluded from the digital economy. So they are in a so-called digital gap. Digital gap is an inequality in access for the technologies and infrastructures. In fact, this is the digital discrimination. In 2011, The free access to the internet has become a fundamental right of the human according to the decree of the UN. The main aim of the concept we are presenting is to overcome in Ukraine this digital gap. So please look at the slide. We have two types of digital infrastructures. They are in the focus today, both in the concept and the government. So-called hard infrastructures, where we're having lots of positive, interesting initiatives as for the 3G and 4G, and the service or soft infrastructures, where we created lots of new things there, but we have the huge potential to grow, which is much bigger. The question is in the dynamics, in the penetration, in the absorption, the depth of the usage and the frequency of usage. So I give the floor to the head of the committee of the Verkhovna Rada as for the of communication and informatization, Mr. Alexander Danchenko. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Good afternoon, dear Prime Minister and Vice Prime Minister. First of all, I'd like to thank for such meeting. And very important thing that the Prime Minister of Ukraine is the leader of this process in Ukraine. Volodymyr Groysman is really important because you are responsible for this direction. You took it and we are helping you from the side of the parliament. We are cooperating with you. The infrastructure. Well, the infrastructure is the foundation, the base of the digital economy. Without the infrastructure, all those slides won't be working. Recently, we adopted a very nice law on the rural healthcare, which is telemedicine as in its foundation. So in India or Canada, for instance, Canada in province of Ontario, before the implementation of e-services or telemedicine, telehealthcare, the necessary coverage is 95% of coverage for the broadband internet and the excess of 97% of people at some area for the infrastructure. So the infrastructure point is the point number one. It's really pleasant that this question of the infrastructure is the first one. 1.5 years ago, thanks to our conjoint work with Volodymyr Groysman, Stepan Ivanovich, with Alexander Ryzhenko, we've signed and joined the unified digital European market. We're still not the member of the European Union, but still, thanks to the conjoint work with Mr. Oettinger, Volodymyr Groysman has signed this plan. This plan is the creation of the unified digital infrastructure for whole Europe, and the investments are estimated approximately for 60 billion of euro, out of which 5 to 6 billions should be given to Ukraine. What's needed for that? We need the unified position from our state, which should be balanced from the point of view of legislation and the initiative of the Cabinet of Ministers. And next Tuesday, we, together with Alexander Ryzhenko, will meet in Strasbourg with the new Euro Commissioner, will make some reports and will speak about the further development. It's really important. Tomorrow, from the point of view of the importance, tomorrow is a very important day because I'd like to thank some of my colleagues because it's the first stage for the 4G, and I'd like to thank the cell operators, the mobile operators, for the work they implemented to enter this tender. What's needed to be done to construct digital infrastructure? I think that there will be some question asked, but Volodymyr Groysman, I'd like to pay your attention that we've adopted an incredibly important law on the access to the infrastructure, which is a telecommunication. Unfortunately, the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine is lagging behind a bit because approximately 30% of the regulations has been developed. But without this law, the creation of infrastructure would be impossible. I'd like to draw your attention. We are cooperating, but we'd like to speed up the tempo. The access to the infrastructure, a very important for today is, well, just this night I came back from Europe and we were speaking about intellectual property. I would like for the business, because we've got lots of mobile operators and communication operators here, for them to understand that the development of the infrastructure and the broadband access doesn't depend on the state only, it depends on you too. 70% of the content which is used by the internet providers, especially the regional ones, is illegal. It doesn't give an opportunity to compete for everyone, and secondly, the image of our country goes down, and the digital plan can be under threat if, first of all, the mobile operators and the television companies don't stop using illegal content. It is incredibly important. The question of the cybersecurity. We are speaking about the digital infrastructure, and the question of cyber protection is number one. We've adopted the first law, the main foundations of the cyber protection. We're having Leonid Evdochenko here, and we would like the whole list of critical infrastructure to be adopted in the state, because the branch needs that too. It's needed by the branch for us to understand where and how we should concentrate our investments. Yes, this law was the first one, and our committee has signed the decree with the 4 similar committees from the Europarlament that together with the European Union up till the end of April we need to adopt the full-scale law on cyber security. Why am I mentioning that? The creation of the infrastructure, the construction of infrastructure, the protection of critical national infrastructure is the foundation of digital economy. Because if the services can't be provided to anyone because they are not protected, it would be the problem for everyone. Digital economy is strong where we have the strong protection and security. From the point of view of the startups, the Cabinet of Ministers and Volodymyr Groysman really pays lots of attention to that, because they have the Innovation Council, though I'm not a big fan of the creation of lots of councils, but the main thing for it to be working. So we came back with Mikhailo Titachuk a couple of months ago from Korea. And Korea is number 1 as for digital economy. If I can show you the ranking, Korea is number 1 and the UK is only at the 3rd place as for the volume of digital economy, as for the profits. So last year, first of all, they renamed the Ministry of Communications into the Ministry of Innovations, Digitalization and Future. And they created, in October this year, the Ministry of the Startups. So they allocated $2.5 billion for the development of startups. Why am I speaking about that? Yes, we are number 1 as for the outsourcing of IT services in Europe. This is an official information. Ukraine is at the first place as for the money, as for the exports of IT services into Europe. European Union approves that. But the problem for us is that the whole profits of these activities is still staying beyond the borders of Ukraine. And what Korea is doing? The delegation of Korea is going along Ukraine, and they are gathering people, and they want to take them to Ukraine. I'm sorry, we have a very harsh conditions for timing. That is why the digital infrastructure, the cyber protection matters, and the development of own IT business on the territory of Ukraine is very important. Thank you. Just 1 minute. First of all, I'd like to ask, what's the level? Who stops those regulations and laws? The Ministry of Infrastructure is stopping that. Okay, I got it. So we have an additional task. For nobody to stop this process, because the speed has the key significance. And as for the councils, I'm always for councils, because this year we've defined, for instance, 300 million for the development of innovative products. We can pretend that the people who are working in the government are the cleverest and they can take decisions, but I don't think so. I think that altogether we have to take decision how to implement this mechanism for it to be used very transparently. Then the point is not the money. Today, 300 million, tomorrow there will be 3 billions. But for that we need the proper system. Yes, we have the huge sum for the startups, but having councils with you, we can create the situation when this mechanism will be efficiently working, the maximum efficient use of this resource. And then we will be able to fill it not only with the budget resource, but by the budgets of our partners to develop startups and to give them support. Including, as it was mentioned correctly, we need to protect the intellectual property, which is really very important part. And today this initiative is in the parliament. I think that it won't be very simple. It will be complicated as for the copyright. Thank you, Volodymyr Groysman. We're having the internet operators here, so please, dear colleagues, speak which obstacles you have in the way of the overcoming of the digital inequality, and please look at the rural locations. Very often you say that it's not profitable to make the village with access. access. So, Mikhailo Shilemba from the Data Group company, please. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Good afternoon, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. the First Vice Prime Minister. I'd like, in a nutshell, to tell you about our vision and opinion as for the digital gap, because this topic is both for the business and the state is really important. What's the reason of the digital gap? Well, in fact, it is the same as the reason of the social gap and infrastructural gap. The villages will always have, unfortunately, fewer users which would be which could afford themselves and which could pay, and to make the digital infrastructure working. I will name you an example. We are the company which connected recently all of the departments of one of the big national banks of Ukraine. And the primal cost in the towns, even the medium-sized towns, was calculated in dozens of thousands of hryvnia. We came to some of the towns where the only civilization is the post office and the bank, and in those villages the primary cost was approximately 1 million hryvnia. So I'm just making a conclusion. The digital gap is our objective reality on default if we don't do anything. So this is how the world is constructed and done. So if we, as the state and the business, don't do anything for this reality to be changed, it will lead in the future to the different layers of our society. The digital gap doesn't give a boy or a girl in the village to have access to the modern knowledge and modern technologies. And unfortunately, though it can be rather painful, but in 10 years they won't be the part of digital economy. We want for the maximum part of our economy to become digital, and the choice they will have is to deal with the hand-made work in their part of the country, or, which is even worse, in Poland or any other country. So our social duty, both as a business and the authorities and the people who are living in this country, to really focus on the overcome of this digital gap. And that is why I really like that you, Mr. Prime Minister, and you, Stepan Ivановich, were mentioning about the reactive speed, that it's time to act. I was speaking how this problem is solved in other countries, because we are not the only big country in Europe. France, Italy, Turkey, out of our neighboring countries, they also have some problems of the hard access of digital infrastructure to the bigger area of their country, and there I saw 3 points. First of all, the target state program. The state is the ideologist and coordinator of the efforts of the authorities and business. Secondly, the combination of the technologies. We can say that every village and every school and every medical facilities should have a gigabyte internet. Well, of course, we need to achieve that, but it won't happen tomorrow. So this is the combination of the technologies of 3G, 4G, and the satellite access. Because the satellite covers 100% of territory of Ukraine, and it's rather quick as for the speed of connection, and the speed can be compared to 3G and 4G as for optic fiber too. And the fourth element, what's done by other countries, is stage solution of this problem. We're having the quick solution of the coverage of the whole territory. They say low-hanging fruits, what can be done really quickly today to overcome this gap, 80-20, the Pareto principle. And then we're having the investments for the hard infrastructure, when we have the connections by the optic fiber, and then we have the connection for the villages, for the schools in those villages, and so on. That is why I just like to say that I believe in the digital future of Ukraine. But as it's written in Bible, the faith without the actions is dead. That is why I have a suggestion. We're, as the only operator of satellite communications in Ukraine, we have an opportunity to connect during half of the year to connect to the broadband and high-speed internet, all of the healthcare facilities and education facilities in Ukraine. We have such an experience in 2012 because we connected more than 12,000 objects in the rural areas during the elections, and we are ready to implement that with a minimum network, even with the primary cost, just to have our own investment to overcome the digital gap in Ukraine. Thank you so much. Well, it depends on the point, but there will be the sums of 100, 200 million of hryvnia for the whole Ukraine. If we're speaking about the 10,000 schools or 10,000 objects, there will be such figures. Okay, we understood the figures. Thank you, Mr. Shelember. Volodymyr Borисovich, yes, I'd like to make it understandable. If the question of the coverage by the quick internet is the question of 100, 200 million of hryvnia, we can solve it just now. I think that this is a very nice suggestion. The only thing I'd like to say, look, in the context of what I heard today, I think that the development of infrastructure is the key. We can buy any TV set, but if we don't have the buttons, it's not working. So those digital discrimination or disproportions which are emerging today, they will be the huge problem for us. We used to have the problem and nobody could feel it. Those are the problems of the 90s, the gap of the 90s, which was speaking the demographic, the educational gap and so on. Now we are having its results, unfortunately. So we need to think about some different system. I have a suggestion. I would like this matter to be very open and public one from the point of view of the transparency of usage of resources, for it to be comprehensible for everyone. I suggest, for instance, next week, together with all of the key stakeholders and players of the market, and to define the resource which can be accessible and the mechanisms this year for the development of the infrastructure. If you're saying that all of the schools and kindergartens of Ukraine will be covered during half of the year with such sums of money, it's not a problem at all, but I think it's impossible. No, it is possible. That's very nice that it's possible. I accept that. Cool. So I suggest next week, let's gather all the stakeholders and players and let's make this solution. We'll have the auction of 4G soon, right? So I think that we can take part of the resource from the 4G and redirect it for the development of the national infrastructure. We're constructing the roads, that's very nice, but I think that to create the infrastructure for the development of the digital economy is the absolutely important priority. It is foreseen by the concept, but I suggest to have some practical implementation of it. Are we having a deal? Okay, it's written down. Next week we'll have the meeting. Can I speak about the roads? We're constructing the roads, but we don't have cables of communications under the roads. Dear colleagues, please, I do know that the cables of communications under the roads shouldn't be constructed. There are lots of territories which that protection, but we shouldn't have to put cables under the asphalt. Why? Under the asphalt? I don't know why we should do that. We're having the road, we have the territory of service where we have the green zone. So this is how it's been constructed. This is the question of the construction. Why should we take the asphalt? Let me say that we have some world experience as for the usage of physical infrastructures. By the way, these are the infrastructures, physical infrastructures like railways, gas distribution and gas which allow us to process the optic fiber technologies really quickly. But we need to move on really quickly, so please, I'm giving the floor to the representative of the company of Voda. Please, Mr. Jamboree. As for the development of the broadband access, how do you think how we can improve the state of affairs in Ukraine? Hello, everyone. I will
to go over to English, and obviously it's more comfortable for me. So if someone doesn't understand, please use your translator. I want to comment this discussion today not just as a co-leader of Broadband and a leader of digital entertainment in Ukraine, but as someone who went through this more than just seeing it very close by in other European countries. I was very happy that Alexander Danchenko already mentioned the access to the infrastructure and the intellectual rights. Unlike in other events, I'm not going to comment on this. But I'd like to emphasize three very basic points. There are a lot of countries who are just putting on the flag, let's go for digital economy, and in half of them nothing happens. And there are places where they are not putting on the flag, and they are just working and it's happening. For example, California or Singapore. So there are certain basic things which can create the environment to push this through. In this country, Ukraine definitely needs strong leadership, and I'm very happy to see that the Prime Minister is standing into these shoes. But let's start with some basic stuff. Set standards and by law regulate what is broadband. There are definitions of it in the word. It's not understood well here in Ukraine yet. And before the Prime Minister would ask me, I'm sure that it's closer to the territory of the regulator how to do that. Why it's important? Because if you have standards and if there is a level playing field how to provide internet access at all, it's not important what kind of technology, then it's going to sort out the market and establishing players who are ready to invest into a lot of things. Until we have 6,000 internet providers in Ukraine, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. And now I'm going into my second point. I think internet access and the high-quality internet access, what the Premier Minister was talking about, is super important. And we can dream about the satellite. Yes, 4G can help, but we need basic fiber infrastructure as well, also for these technologies. And you should know that as Volya, we reviewed several rural projects in the last 3 years. The last one was in the southern part of Kharkov Oblast, a little bit north of Lazovaya. And when we are checking all these projects, the payback is 125 years. So what happened in Europe, for example, that public-private partnerships were created, which usually were funded by either the EU or by the local government. I was happy to hear these big numbers which can be invested into this infrastructure. And I want to emphasize that as Volya, we would be delighted to join this kind of projects in selected areas, especially which is closer to our networks. If there is more coverage, it doesn't mean that it's solving the digital economy question, because the whole point is what they're using this infrastructure. And as the biggest buyer of content in Ukraine, we would be also delighted to develop and provide other content, not just entertainment, like education. And as also an application developer, we would be happy to contribute to the e-government development. In especially Western Ukraine in the last 2-3 years, we had a lot of discussions about developing smart cities in oblast centers. Without certain legal frames and rules and control, unfortunately not a lot happened. So I think developing the infrastructure is one important area, but also to demonstrate to the people how they can use it and enrich their lives is even more important for them. There are some fancy stuff, how we are using, for example, Apple and Google. But what I experienced in the world, that how it's changing the everyday transactions can have an impact, like in the agriculture, like in the energy usage, and everything which makes our life easier, for example, dealing with the government. We like to be partner in this, and we would like to see that this leadership is demonstrated in very specific steps in the near future. Thank you.
Дякую, пан Джембері.
Thank you, Mr. Jamboree. I think that under the influence of the digital economy, even the activities of our internet providers will be transformed from the communications operators to the digital platforms operators, let it be education or healthcare. Among the presentees, we're having representatives of our regulator of National Commission for the State Regulation of Communications and Informatization. I hope they will speak, and maybe if anyone of the audience wants to speak about the digital infrastructures, there will be the microphone. Yes, please, Mr. Alexander Zhivatovsky, he's the head of the National Commission. Hello, everyone, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Stepan Ivanovich, and respectful operators. Well, undoubtedly, we are greeting this initiative of the government, the concept and the plan of the development. Speaking about the broadband access, one of the elements of this plan is the development of the so-called national plan of the development of the broadband access. This plan, in fact, needs to answer, well, it is in a one simple but rather complicated, I would say, question: how the state can stimulate the operators to develop the broadband access in the places where it's economically not profitable. So those plans can be found in any country. In Poland, in Moldova, the European Council has defined for itself that up till 2020, if I'm not mistaken, 100% of the households must have access for not less than 30 megabytes a second, and 50% not less than 100 megabytes a second. This access can be reflected in the operator's work. So the only problem in the rural and distant villages is that very often it's economically not profitable. So the question is how to stimulate it. Well, respecting the government and the MPs, it seems to me that the development of such plan has to be based upon the offers of the operators, how and which leverages you need. Whether this is the tax breaking or some stimulating legislation, it is for the MPs, or maybe some of the direct subsidies, or some of the regulatory policy which will define about a certain rayon and certain oblast. And without your input, I consider that it will be very complicated to implement the mechanism which will be working, which will give us the live results. So we again greet this initiative, we're ready to help. And without the operators and without the voice of this branch, it will be very complicated to implement. Thank you. Well, maybe I'll say a couple of words about the two speeches. Well, I mentioned about the clever regulation, and you're right in that. I'd like to speak to my colleagues, because we're living in real life, and in our country we have too much of regulations. We have some of the distortion of authorities, some of the questions which can be regulated by the decrees, they are regulated by the laws so much that to change something we need to create a new law or changes to the existed laws. So our legislation is constructed in this way that it is too regulated too much. We're a bit limited because it takes us weird lack mobility. We don't have speed, so we can't take decisions quickly. This is one of the elements of the stoppage of our development. We are thinking how to change it globally. The next position, as for the access to the infrastructure, well, it's understandable. When we have the infrastructure, we can fill it with any content, with any other opportunities. I think that we need to consider simpler solutions. We have the country with different levels of access towards the infrastructure, or even the lack of infrastructure. We involve all of the players at this market, all of the players without exclusion. We define the unified criteria, and we can say that we can create the fund as it is foreseen by our concept, and we will fill it with the resources to compensate part of the prices of the capital expenses for the development of the network. We shouldn't invent the story with taxes, tax breaks, or anything else. We have constructed it. We need to construct the network. We defined that it costs 200 million, so the state can take, for instance, the part of this sum in those solutions and decisions. Moreover, I can say that for each area we can foresee the stage-by-stage implementation, and somewhere we can speak about 3G and 4G implementation, and somewhere we can speak about the solution of optic fiber networks. It needs to be done really precisely, the accessibility of those areas. Besides that, I consider that in this matter, our partners could be the local authorities. As you know, as the result of the decentralization reform, at the places they take attention the tens of billions of additional resources that can be used, parts of which can be used for the development of digital infrastructure. That is why I'd like to emphasize that during the next week I'm ready to speak with all of the main key players of the market to discuss the mechanisms. Please prepare your suggestions and the algorithm of our actions. I'd like to move really quickly. We're working with, took the decision, we've created all the public mechanisms for no one to ask us about the efficiency and the transparency, and we begin to implement, because I think that this year it's necessary for us to conduct the necessary steps in this direction. Okay, thank you. We can see the kind of the creation of this public-private fund of overcoming of digital inequality, which can have regional parts and departments and solve those questions at the places with the local authorities. Maybe someone from the audience wants to speak about the digital infrastructure? Yes, please, the microphone. Please introduce yourself. Good afternoon, the presentees, and Mr. Volodymyr Groysman and Stepan Ivanovich. My name is Alexander Frontman. I'm the head of the board of Transitions of Ukraine. The internet has more than 200 operators. We are the representatives of the medium business, which is in Ukraine. We're speaking now about the broadband access in Ukraine, but I'd like to mention for the dear presentees, and maybe we need to work upon that, where we have the term in the legislation as for the broadband access towards the internet network. Unfortunately, we don't have this notion, this term. First of all, it identifies the online connection, because the connection has to be permanent, the speed, which has to be permanent, and the key factor is the speed. Unfortunately, the speed in our country is not regulated. That is why we can say a lot about the digital infrastructure, transformations, but when we say that our rural schools have connection for 100% and the speed is 10 to 20 megabit, I am sure it wouldn't be enough. And we have our own analytics. It wouldn't be enough to implement multimedia content, which is necessary for the online education. This is one remark. I'm sure we need to work upon that. Another pain is what was mentioned by Mr. Alexander Ivanovich. Thank you that you reincarnated this topic, the access towards the infrastructure. Unfortunately, for you to understand, we have the constant ruinage of the operators of fixated access who have some of the optic channels of communication in the rural areas. They are ruined by the energy companies who don't give any access, and on the other hand, even if there is access, in a year they need to disassemble it, or maybe the rent payment is becoming so high that we don't have the certain profitability for the people who can pay for that. So if we don't solve this matter now, and I consider that we are at the point when it needs to be, I'm asking you, Mr. Volodymyr Vasilyevich, when you need to interfere, because, as I told, we have the Ministry for Infrastructure where we are stuck. And they are having some of the amendments to this law instead of moving forward, and they are preparing some of the amendments to this law. Mr. Alexander, please try to be laconic. We need to interfere into this situation because we won't have different situations. We need to apply for the commercial energy companies which are ruining our operators without giving access for the rural localities. Yes, it's very interesting. But Oblenergo ruins not only that, but the questions of access to the electric networks. Maybe this is not the topic of today's meeting, but more and more often I can hear some of the reproaching from the business, the possibility how to create the enterprises. This is the huge problem, and the energy companies block that. We need to regulate that at the legislation level. This is an interesting suggestion, how to define the broadband, the term. Is it 256, 100, or like it's in Korea, 1 gigabyte? Well, I will answer this question because we can find that in the law on e-communications, which is unfortunately in the parliament for 3 years already. All of those norms have to be voted for. Volodymyr Groysman, as for Oblenergo, we need to define them as the objects of critical infrastructure. Then it will be easier, because it's already done in the whole world. They have to be objects of the critical infrastructure, and then they can be regulated. But the law is adopted, it's already voted for. We need to define them as objects of critical infrastructure, and then you won't have any questions. Please, now I'm giving the floor to Mr. Petro Chernyshev, who is the president of Kyivstar company. I'd like to speak about the digital inequality. To overcome it, you said that we need broadband internet in the rural areas, but we have some other ways. What we're speaking with our regulator, the National Commission, we can make the proper access to the operators, to the frequencies which we have access to, and then all the villages will be covered by 3G, and if we speed it up, even with 4G. But there are lots of interests. The military, which interfere, our complicated interests of 3 mobile operators which are not in consent. So if we work on that in a quick way with the regulator, the state won't have to pay anything. We can pay for those frequencies. And you just forgot to say that when you cover with the broadband access, every month, every school would have to pay for the usage, and a rather substantial sum of money. In our case, it will be paid by each person who is using either the point of access, the universal modem, or the smartphone, so the state won't have to pay for anything. So I have a request. Let's speed up the access of the operators to the frequencies. This is the easiest thing which was implemented in Europe, in South Korea, in America. So I'd like to say that before the auction on 4G, which will happen tomorrow, the Ukrainian operators have access only to 1/3 of frequencies in comparison with South Korean and European operators. This is what we need to overcome. We need to have access to the 100% of frequencies, which they got an access 3-4 years ago. Thank you, Mr. Peter. The time is very limited. To be short, please, Mr. the head of the Commission. Volodymyr Borissovich, Stepan Ivanovich, and dear colleagues, I sincerely thank you for an opportunity to take part in this event. And as we have a very high level of representativeness because we have the Prime Minister here, the questions must have the strategic character to use the time in the most efficient way. As the head of the Special Communications Commission, which is the administration for Ukraine, we really greet the adoption of this concept of the development of digital economy for the society. We consider that it's a big priority for all of the structures and spheres, and for now it's very timely, and all of us understand that. All of the state authorities and the legislation branch and all of the operators and commercial structures understand that. I'd like to say that there were lots of things done in this direction. I'd like to emphasize the adoption of the law on e-services, which gave the start for the international cooperation in the economic sphere. We've done the crypto algorithms of the digital signatures adopted in Ukraine and in the EU. I'd like also to thank Alexander Ivanovich Donchenko for his support of our events and for their adoption of the law on the main parts of cybersecurity. The whole sector of cybersecurity for today has its responsibility zones and control zones and authorities. It's really important for the state, which is unfortunately today in the rather complicated conditions of the external aggression. Just a couple of words more. I consider very important question of protection, the provision of information or protection of the informational resources, the cyber protection and security of all of the subjects of critical national infrastructure, the usage of our opportunities, because Ukraine is in the top 10 of country which develop our own school of cryptography. I'd like to, using an opportunity, to thank the Prime Minister of Ukraine for his support for giving the necessary resources, the construction of the state system of cyber protection, which is being modernized for today. It's being developed and it's at the international level already. One more point. For today, we're using the interaction between the state and the operators, Ukrainian operators, from the point of view of the usage of the leading experts in the IT sphere and cybersecurity. We are having the solution and the decision by the decree of the president to involve those experts under the principle of outsourcing. I consider it's really important that we have the dialogue to go on with our dialogue. As for the main law for our sphere, this is the law on e-communications. We need to provide its adoption. Thank you, Leonid Alexandrovich. One more important digital infrastructure, blockchain. Ukraine is in the top 14 of the world as for the development of blockchain. These are the data of the Davos Economic Forum, which took place last week. And also there was the World Conference on Blockchain, and we are having here Mr. Mark Ginsburg, the digital investor, and Valery Vavilov, the head of the company Bifury. Mr. Ginsburg recently sold his apartment for bitcoins, and suddenly we have the loss in the course of Bitcoin. We don't know why. So, Mr. Mark, the rate of Bitcoin went down. What are the news from Davos and New York, please? Hello. In Davos, we are holding one of the biggest events on blockchain for the third year running, and we can see the exponential growth of interest towards this technology. This year, in Davos, as for the level of popularity, the word blockchain took the second place. The first place was taken by the word Trump. And according to the latest report on the Big 20, there's lots of place taken by blockchain room. And there were certain conclusions that sooner or later any state of the world will use this technology, and the state which will use this technology and will be the first to use the technology of blockchain will get the colossal competitive advantage, because using this technology you can decrease the bureaucracy of all of the economic processes and to improve its speed and to improve the storage and the protection of the information. Ukraine has already implemented the first steps on the implementation of several pilot projects, and I think that the next steps will be rather rapid, because Ukraine can become one of the leading countries of the world as for the implementation of this technology. Thank you. Well, really, on the 25th of September in Ukraine, we implemented the first in the world transaction as for the sales of the premises sales for the cryptocurrency with the whole cycle of the blockchain technology. Just to make it clear, the host said that the apartment was sold for the Bitcoin. It's not true. It was sold for Ethereum, and all of the digital currencies went up because it was on the 25th of September. And the decrease of this rate was because we didn't have any other transactions like that. Yes, the result was really substantial. All of the media, which could be rather substantial, the news channels and internet resources, they devoted lots of attention to that. The Wall Street Journal wrote a separate article about that. And the international acknowledgement was based on the high international ranking of the transaction participants. The buyer was one of the Silicon Valley most famous people, Michael Arrington. The mediator was the international agency Propi, which recently had a very successful ICO. And the curator of this transaction, which was always emphasized, was the state structure, the state agency on e-governance. By the way, the people who are working there, Mr. Zrizhenko, Vyskup, Yermolenko, they demonstrated an exquisite, precise and proper modern understanding of the principles of these activities and the vision of algorithms how to implement it. So what I'd like to say, after that I visited lots of blockchain summits and conferences in Hong Kong, in Miami, in Shanghai, in Cancun, in San Francisco, and I was impressed how big attention, how substantial attention is paid to this, how positive reaction was of all of the participants of this crypto community for this process, because they perceived it as a fact that in Ukraine we have a very progressive thinking government. That today, as Alexander Danchenko properly mentioned, this is the real fact that Ukraine takes the first place in Europe as for the software export. And the implementation of such transactions and the first place on the export of soft is the foreseen by the government projects of the transitions of the land cadastre to the blockchain technology. All of that gives us huge hopes and enthusiasm into the hearts of the investors all over the world. And I can see the huge positive in that. And such a nice signal that it's necessary to go on with that, because today we have a very huge demand, a huge positive among the investors which look at Ukraine and want to invest. The main thing is not to lag behind and to move on. So in the end of 2017, one of the mobile operators implemented the service of digital identification, mobile ID, which is an important element of digital infrastructure. This initiative was supported by the government and the Prime Minister of Ukraine. In the digital economy, the cooperation between people is the virtual. That is why the trust is very important. This was provided by the mobile ID. Please try to be very short. For now, it's Mr. Yevgen Kruzhan. Please, on 1 minute only, about the main features of mobile ID. Microphone, please. I'm really thankful for the opportunity to present this service. I greet the Prime Minister and the first Vice Prime Minister. Kyivstar, in the end of December last year, implemented the mobile ID service into the research exploitation. We promised to implement it a year ago. We had this council, we've done it, and now we are at the edge, at the threshold. Could you please show the first slide? You have 1 minute only? Okay. Mobile ID is really a protected infrastructure service which will allow us to speed up the processes in the economy. For today, this is only the digital identification. Later on, it will be the digital signature. Now we are in the process of the gaining of the conclusions about the SIM card, about the platform, for it to be legalized and for it to be used to sign and to use by the state and commercial services. The next slide, please. We are planning in July this year to implement it in the commercial exploitation. That is why I've got a huge request. The people who want to connect your e-services, please apply for us. We have an aim to connect 10 to 15 service providers to the middle of the year, and up till the end of the year, approximately 100 of them will open 30 shops where you can connect it. For today, we have the first shop at Krusharik Street, and we've got first lucky owners of this mobile ID. But there are certain questions, the next slide please, which we need to solve. This is access towards the libraries, because we are using elliptic systems of protection, crypto protection. We need those libraries to be accessible, and we are applying to the Commission for those libraries to become accessible. And please, the next slide. Secondly, we have so far the ban, the prohibition to procure mobile services by the state enterprises and facilities. This is still the decree of the Cabinet of Ministers since 2014. So I've got a request. Please look at the possibility of how to cancel this ban, this prohibition for us, for the state services, to give access to the users and the subscribers of the state enterprises. We can see that in Europe it gives the great push, because we as an operator, we want to make this service the best, cheap and really comfortable, convenient for the digital services to develop. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Yevgen. We'll go on with the digital infrastructure wrap-up. Several words about from the Vodafone company. Mr. Oleg Przewalski, please, just a couple of sentences, and this is the end in this block. Well, it's understandable that a mobile communication is the foundation of the informational technologies. This is the transport component which develops all the other services. We don't ask for money. We need the conditions for the normal business. I'd like to thank you and the authorities that during the recent 3 years, Ukraine has implemented, as for the creation of the normal conditions, much more things in comparison with the previous 20 years. So it's enough to say that with the Ministry of Ukraine, we've developed the events which are almost implemented, half of them at least are implemented, as for the cancellation of some of the regulations which interfere into our work. Now we need for today the only thing to adopt the laws which are for a year already in the Parliament, in the Verkhovna Rada, about the info communications, about the radio frequency resource. We are now for today in such a slavery, unfortunately, legislation as for the frequency of radio resources. So if we have these resources, we'll develop the mobile communication level of the third, fourth level for the 10,000 of population. But if we have the digital dividend, we'll go deeper, and you won't have to pay the budget costs. And another one point is that we used to have the payment for the cell phone, which was an additional one, 7.5 to the pension fund, 7.5%. It was a kind of the payment for the luxury, but this is not the luxury anymore. I think that this money can be redirected for the fund of development for those distant villages. I'd like to say one thing. They will say that it will give access to the frequencies, but you can sell it to us. It won't be given for free. Please give us an access for those frequencies for money. So I'm for a clever deregulation. Those words like slavery is very negative one. So we need to deregulate it. The only question is the specific needs of the protection and defense. We need to see the difference between them. Everything must have free access. If you see that deregulator is not objective, and the regulator will perceive this information objectively and will make response. Right? Right. Because everyone who stops us, because we were stopped for the 26 years. I emphasize on that. We were regulated too much. We were weakened institutionally. We were just ruined by the inefficiency, by lots of other things. Because nothing happened for the 20 years or 15 or 10 years. These were the times of lost opportunities. How can we have 12% of growth of economy, but in the end we're having debts? Look at our state debt now. And we do understand that. So I'm for deregulation, but it should be a very clever process. So I'm totally agreeing with you. Please use the government. The government is ready to adopt the necessary solutions. I'm deeply persuaded that in the parliament we will find the proper understanding. This parliament, I know that the society doesn't like it as any representative of the authorities, but this parliament is able to adopt the normal and good decisions. Thank you, Volodymyr Borysovich. We're moving on. The main conclusion of the digital infrastructure block. This is the priority of the concept, so we can see that this is the painful matter, but there are no things which can't be solved. As for the next block, the digitalizations of agrarian sector and the real sector of the economy, and the key point is which should be the strategy of Ukraine as for the development of the digital economy among its users. I mean the business, the industry, and branches of economy. So please I give the floor. The head of the Supervisory Board, Mironivsky Brad, or MHP, Yuri Kosuk. Mr. Prime Minister, members of the government, thank you so much for an opportunity to have a speech here. In our situation, everything is very simple. We're having only one problem, the problem of the populists, which are in the agrarian sector, and they're shouting about huge companies. But the big companies are today the pride of Ukraine on the world market. The big companies are the most efficient companies at the digital market. The big companies who are sending the children with the startups to their companies, and they accelerate this process for those children not to leave our country because they have bright heads and the energy, this wild energy they are having. We are ready to give our own experts and our opportunities, industrial opportunities, for them to be implemented. There are lots of criticism that we are going to have lots of dividends on that. The biggest dividend for me and for the company is Happy Ukraine, the big Happy Ukraine, where these people will children, or maybe not even children, the groups of those children, implement those projects on the base of the big company. It's very simple at our place. I'd like to warn all of you saying about the digital transformation. Digital transformation will lead towards in the agrarian industry towards the monopolization or the increase of the business, because the most successful will become even more successful. They will become even more efficient. We are decreasing the number of stuff because we are implementing artificial intelligence, and it helps us to take the best specialists, experts, to pay more, to send people to the newly created productions where we expand our activities. But we need to understand that the shout of the populists will be that we're having some new monsters, and they're becoming even bigger monsters. It's very simple. We are just more efficient. Maybe we have some more cynical approach, and we are more pragmatic. We are the good for the country. Maybe for the populists it's not good because their base vanishes, their value is vanishing, because we are showing what can be done in the existing country without the changes in the legislation, how to be successful and to create the successful business. The state in the agrarian sector has the catastrophically huge potential, and as an example of MHP company, we will show it. Dear colleagues, Volodymyr Borисovich has a very busy schedule. Mr. Hos, you're saying that, dear colleagues, with such an intonation. Mr. Groysman has such an awful schedule. It's okay. I'm rather energetic one, so it's okay. Yes, it's a busy schedule, but I can deal with that. So, dear colleagues, first of all, I'd like to thank you for such an interesting discussion. Really, I was planning to stay here up till 11, and it's already 25 minutes to 12. I need to come back, because really, as every day, it's very tense, and I think it's not even tenser than you have, because all of us have a huge bulk of work to do. I'd like to thank you for this quality. It was a high quality, and the most important thing that in this discussion you have the precise accents and focuses. It's very important for us. The constant meetings with the business, the sectoral meetings with an expert community, they give me the understanding which are the needs and how we can respond adequately. So I thank you for that. And of course, I consider that big companies which represent our country in the country and beyond the borders of our country, and which are still leaders, this is our pride. I think that we need to support them, to help them, and not to interfere in their development, and to help them grow. Of course, I am against the monopolies. I understand that monopolization is not productive. Though we can't stop the natural process of the growth of the companies, the renovation of technologies, the implementation of new products, the representation at the new markets. I'd like to say that this year this is the first time when we are creating one more tool, the Office of the Support of Export. This is an institution, the state institution. Besides that, we are creating Export Credit Agency for the product of Ukraine to have support. I mean the products with the higher added value. The complex of the problems we've mentioned as for the digital economy and the technologies as it is understandable for me. I think that we need to regulate the legislation matters and the regulations. I'd like to emphasize and underline that everything which concerns the regulations of the government, they can be quickly adopted if we develop them together with you, if we have the correspondent expertise by the participants of the market. And we can say that we're having the market mechanisms which are honest and transparent. Of course, I understand that the technological breakthrough leads to such risks as not only disproportionate discrimination of the access towards the digital infrastructure, but to the possible decrease of employment. And for us, as the state, it has the critical significance, so it's understandable that the companies, the leaders, will develop. Our task, as the task of the government, is to find the support programs for the development of those branches, those directions trends which have the greater involvement of the working force, which have to be innovative too. As for the agrarian sector, this is the first time when we issue the program of the support of Ukrainian farmers. We can say that in 2 or 3 years it will be such a great engine. We'll become the participants and witnesses, if nobody interferes, will become witnesses that Ukraine will have the high-quality professional farmers class. It will give us employment and the internal market feeling of eco products and so on. We need to speak not only about the technologies to increase our productivity, we need to speak about the creation of the final product for the correspondent markets. That is why we've got lots of tasks. The only thing I'd like to say is that it's really important when the real sector and the state, the authorities, they understand each other and they take common and conjoint decisions. Recently, and even now, I understand the sufferings of the companies because of the pressures from the law enforcement, because of the blockage or some of the servers vanishing and the primary documentation, including very dishonest competition. We banned to do it by the new decisions. So the show of the masks should stop, because it has the constitutional majority. What it tells us about that the proper solutions can be supported by the parliament. And from the point of view of the Prime Minister, I am always on your side, on the side of the people who develop our products and is doing that honestly and openly. Well, it's understandable that we have the people who interfere our right to do that. Those are the populists, people who don't choose the words. They're saying the words, the things they are not planning to implement. They promise everything for the very quick award. This is our grief, because this is the time for the responsible policy, the policy which allows us not only to speak about the solutions, but to implement them and to adopt them. I think that we need to cultivate these principles. I can't even imagine if we take two companies, which are rather successful, two of them, and one of them was governed by the professional managers and young creative people, and the other would be governed by the populists. Would you tell me what would happen? Is any of the presentees is ready to give the governance to the populists? I think you're not ready to give, because you were working for dozens of years and it will be ruined just during half of the year. So you do understand the risks which we are facing every day, and me as a Prime Minister. Still, I emphasize that I am a total optimist, absolute optimist. And having the proper approach towards the right systems and the freeing of your opportunities, we can achieve very understandable success. Well, of course, we need the fair Ukrainian court. We need a normal business environment, normal climate to conduct business in Ukraine. We have this discrimination, which we can find, the control discrimination and the discrimination of the law enforcement. We need to ruin it as a class. All the rest will be done, I'm deeply assured, it will be done by the engines, by the people who are the engines of the national economy and development. So again, I'd like to emphasize that I thank you for such a high-quality discussion. I invite you for the cooperation and some of the precise matters we've discussed. First of all, we need to overcome or to form the more precise plan from the concept to the real plan of actions, how to liquidate this digital discrimination for us to have the simultaneous technological solutions, because we have different solutions from each of you, but with different solutions to make this accessibility. I'm ready to take part, and next week I invite you to work on those solutions. And the next point is to form the package of decisions which have to be looked at the Parliament. I will ask the Speaker of the Parliament. I'm sure that he has the total understanding that these laws must have the package voting during some of the plenary or session days when we can look at them and adopt the certain decisions. And I would like to thank you again and to wish you success. Your success is the success of the country, so thank you again, and I wish us victory. Volodymyr Borysovich, a short remark. I'd like to thank you for such a successful format. It seems to me that we don't have enough time for the discussion, and obviously it's coming. It says us that you've got lots of questions for you, because such a format when the representatives of the government and the business are discussing the digital talk is very important, but we need to hold this format several times a year, at least 3 times a year. We are ready to organize it. Yes, I agree. So I thank you for such initiatives. Thank you again. See you.